Berlin is a city broken by the global Great Depression. 30% of the German working-age population is unemployed. The air is thick with desperation. Soup kitchen lines stretch across every major street. Poverty is not a statistic. It is a visible, choking reality. Fast forward just 6 years to Berlin in 1939. It is Hitler's 50th birthday. The scene is unrecognizable. Unemployment is close to zero. The soup kitchens are gone, replaced by marching formations of the new German army. This is not a ragtag militia, it is a war machine equipped with thousands of state-of-the-art tanks, howitzers, half-tracks, and hundreds of modern fighters and bombers. This army, this engine of devastation that would soon humiliate the Belgian, Dutch, Nordic, Polish, British, and French forces, had been built up from virtually nothing in 6 short years. This transformation was achieved despite Germany's crippled economy, a crippling war debt, and its limited access to crucial raw materials such as iron ore, rubber, and oil. This seemingly impossible transformation, this economic miracle that ultimately fielded such devastation, was not accidental. It was meticulously, ruthlessly, and brilliantly engineered by one man, Hjalmar Schacht. Schacht was a financial architect so unorthodox, so skilled in the art of monetary manipulation, that he earned the nickname the Dark Wizard of International Finance. He devised financial tricks that allowed Nazi Germany to seemingly defy economic gravity. He managed to spend billions on a military buildup, eliminate unemployment, and secure vital imports, all without triggering the hyperinflation that had ruined the Weimar Republic a decade earlier. So how did he do it? And what can we learn from the Nazi economic miracle today? In an era where central banks are once again hiding debt and prioritizing political goals over economic reality, this is the story of the ultimate deception, a period where financial genius was twisted into a tool for mass murder. I will tell you not just what tricks Schacht used to rebuild the German economy, but how this fundamentally reshaped global power and, most critically, why the inherent instability of his economic system pushed Germany to war. This is the economic miracle that killed millions. To truly understand the Nazi economic miracle, we need to understand the economic ghost that Schacht was hired to exorcise, the Weimar Republic. This story starts in the early 20th century. By the 1920s, the new German Republic was reeling under a dual catastrophic economic crisis. The first was a crippling international balance of payments crisis. The Treaty of Versailles had severely reduced Germany's ability to export while simultaneously forcing it to pay massive reparations in foreign currency. These reparations, worth about 2.5% of German GDP, quickly depleted the Reichsbank's foreign exchange reserves, gold, dollars, pounds. The Reichsbank was rapidly running out of the foreign currency needed for factories to import raw materials, the lifeblood of German industry. The economy faced a death sentence: shut down, starve, or pay. The second crisis was a massive domestic war debt owed to the German people by the deposed Kaiser. Conventional economics offered only two brutal solutions to this dual debt load: either extreme austerity, crash the economy to cut imports, or outright default on reparations or domestic debt. Both options meant political ruin and civil unrest. The Weimar government, lacking good alternatives, turned to the printing press. Every time they printed money to pay domestic workers or buy gold on international markets to service reparations, the value of the German mark plummeted. This was not a mistake born of economic ignorance. It was a desperate choice. The inflation was the policy. It helped the Weimar government survive temporarily, and crucially, it eventually inflated away the massive domestic war debt. However, it also wiped out the savings and pensions of millions of middle-class Germans, sowing the resentment that Hitler would later harvest. In 1923, Hjalmar Schacht, the ambitious, sharp-witted nationalist, was brought in by the new government to fix the crisis. His solution was brilliant, but dependent on foreign aid. He negotiated the Dawes Plan, which temporarily reduced reparations, and he introduced a new currency. With the domestic debt wiped out by hyperinflation, and the immediate threat of reparations eased, confidence returned. Foreign investment, primarily from Wall Street, flooded Germany. This led to the so-called Golden Age of Weimar. But this Golden Age was a ticking time bomb. It was entirely reliant on continuous foreign loans. When the US stock market collapsed in 1929, those Wall Street loans came to an abrupt end. At the same time, global protectionism meant German exports collapsed. Weimar Germany was thrust back into a devastating balance of payments crisis. This time, due to the traumatic memory of 1923, printing money was politically impossible. Exports were blocked by tariffs. Schacht, failing to negotiate a lasting deal on reparations, resigned in 1930. The subsequent Weimar governments chose the only option left: deliberately crash the economy. They enacted harsh austerity, raising taxes and cutting spending to make the population so poor that they could no longer afford to import foreign goods. This brutal self-inflicted depression preserved the Reichsbank's last few reserves, but resulted in the crippling 30% unemployment, massive poverty, and the proliferation of soup kitchens. This engineered poverty destroyed the political center. Impoverished and disillusioned voters fled to the radical fringes, communists on the left and the Nazi Party on the far right. It was here, at a far-right rally in 1931, that Schacht, disgusted by the Weimar government's perceived spinelessness and failure, made his political pivot, appearing alongside Hitler to criticize the reparation policies. The economic failure of the Weimar Republic didn't just create unemployment, it created the opportunity for the Nazis to seize power. When Hitler became Chancellor in January 1933, he immediately installed Schacht as the president of the Reichsbank and later as economy minister. Schacht faced three Herculean tasks. 1. End mass unemployment. 2. Finance Hitler's massive rearmament drive. And 3. Solve the recurring fatal balance of payments crisis without using gold or causing hyperinflation. Schacht knew that simply borrowing and spending, like FDR's New Deal, would only be a surface solution and would quickly run into the inflation and import problem. The key to the miracle lay in his ability to hide debt and control the price of money without appearing to do so. His first tool was a classic Keynesian approach: massive public works spending, autobahns, infrastructure. This was the Neuer plan, but this was the facade. Behind the surface, Schacht rapidly redirected most of this spending to the military. This was illegal under the Treaty of Versailles, so the spending had to be hidden from foreign creditors and domestic watchdogs. His solution was a masterful piece of financial black magic, the Mefo Bill. The Mefo Bill was not a traditional government bond or currency. It was a government debt instrument disguised as a commercial bill of exchange. Schacht established a shell corporation, the Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft, Metal Research Corporation, or MEFO, which existed only on paper. The MEFO Corporation issued bills that were guaranteed by the Reichsbank and the government. Here is the genius of the trick. 1. Debt concealment. The government used these MEFO bills to pay industrial contractors for tanks, planes, and steel. Since MEFO was a technically private company, the billions of Reichsmarks spent on rearmament did not appear on the official government budget or the national debt statistics. It was deficit spending, completely off the books. 2. Backdoor money printing. The bills had a short maturity, 6 months, but were perpetually renewable for up to 5 years, making them long-term debt. Crucially, the Reichsbank guaranteed that commercial banks could rediscount these MEFO bills, meaning the Reichsbank would buy them back at face value. This allowed Schacht to inject massive liquidity and print money through the back door, financing the rearmament drive to the tune of 12 billion Reichsmarks, all while maintaining the appearance of budgetary discipline and avoiding conventional money printing that would signal immediate inflation. Schacht had successfully found a way to create money without calling it money, and create debt without calling it debt. The ultimate deception had begun. With the unemployment problem solved by massive military spending hidden by Mefo bills, Schacht had to tackle the two forces that would inevitably lead to inflation and collapse: the foreign exchange crisis, needed for raw materials, and domestic wage inflation. His solution to the foreign crisis was the new plan of 1934 and a complete reversal of global trade principles. Schacht had watched the US and UK use protectionism to hurt Germany. Now he would use his own form of economic warfare. Schacht abruptly stopped using gold or internationally accepted currencies, dollars, pounds, for trade with smaller nations. Instead, he forced Germany's trading partners, particularly those in Central and Southeastern Europe and South America, to enter into bilateral barter agreements. Germany would buy raw materials like oil from Romania or tobacco from Turkey, and pay for them in Reichsmarks that could only be used to buy German-made goods. This system achieved a structural coup: gold preservation. Germany preserved its precious gold and foreign currency reserves for absolute necessities, high-grade steel, etc. Geopolitical dependency. It trapped these smaller nations. They were forced into tight, dependent trading relationships with Germany because their Reichsmark earnings were useless anywhere else. Schacht used economic dependency as a geopolitical tool to secure the vital raw materials needed for the Wehrmacht. This semi-autarky, or economic self-sufficiency, meant Germany was preparing its economy for a long-term blockade, but it came at an enormous cost: efficiency. Synthetic rubber and fuel were vastly more expensive than imported equivalents, but Schacht heavily subsidized them, pushing the real cost of rearmament even higher. On the domestic front, Schacht implemented his third and fourth tools: dual wage controls and price controls. Wage controls. The Nazis quickly outlawed independent labor unions and replaced them with the state-controlled German Labor Front. This organization, far from advocating for workers, actively worked to prevent wage increases, As the economy reached near full employment, German workers would normally have demanded higher pay, triggering inflation. Schacht simply outlawed it. German workers saw the economy grow dramatically on paper, but their real wages remained relatively stagnant. Price controls. To prevent market demand from causing price surges in areas where supply was choked due to import controls, the Nazi bureaucracy introduced price controls. The government simply dictated that prices in certain categories, textiles, food, could not rise. This combination, massive deficit spending via Mefo bills combined with total control over wages and prices, allowed Schacht to achieve his impossible goal, zero unemployment and massive rearmament without visible inflation. However, he had only postponed the inevitable. The suppressed inflation simply manifested as shortages. Because prices couldn't rise to match demand, there was a chronic lack of consumer goods. Ordinary Germans had stagnant wages and difficulty finding textiles, coffee, or even certain food products. Schacht had traded economic freedom and consumer prosperity for military might and artificial stability. Schacht's methods were not just unconventional, they were ruthless and utterly devoid of moral consideration. His final, most brutal tools were dedicated to preserving the state's reserves at the expense of human liberty, selective debt default, and personal capital controls. Facing persistent debt obligations to foreign private creditors, Schacht, in a move that shocked the financial world, announced a selective default on Germany's remaining debts to the US, UK, Netherlands, and Switzerland. This scorched earth approach meant no one would ever lend to Germany again, but Schacht gambled correctly that this wouldn't matter during the Great Depression. The default bought him critical time. He then engaged in frantic side negotiations, selectively paying back some creditors, like the UK and Netherlands, in exchange for favorable trade deals, while stiffing the US entirely, a calculated punishment for high American protectionism that limited German exports. The ultimate display of his brutal economic logic, however, came with the Nazis' persecution of the Jewish population. As Nazis like Himmler encouraged Jews to emigrate through violence, Schacht saw this as a massive threat to the Reichsbank's fragile reserves. German Jews had an estimated wealth of 8 billion Reichsmarks. The Reichsbank had only 100 million in foreign exchange. If all Jews were to emigrate and convert their assets to foreign currency, the Reichsbank would be instantly bankrupted. Schacht's solution was personal capital controls limiting emigrating Jews to taking only about 50,000 Reichsmarks in assets with them, forcing them to leave the vast majority of their wealth to the state. The cruel economic logic of the Dark Wizard ensured that many Jews stayed behind in a country that would go on to commit genocide on them, simply because Schacht needed to protect the balance sheet. By 1935, the entire German economy was functioning as a single, centrally controlled, quasi-communist command structure, not in ownership, but in control. Schacht's bureaucracy determined what wages could be paid, what prices could be set, which sector received crucial resources, steel, coal quotas, what could be imported, and who could emigrate. This level of control enabled the unparalleled military buildup. Civilian sectors were deliberately squeezed. The construction sector, a major user of steel, was starved of resources by cutting local government budgets and restricting mortgages, all to free up steel for tanks and ships. The economic miracle for the military was a deliberate economic suppression of the civilian sector. By 1936, Schacht's economic miracle was technically a success, but it was standing on a foundation of rapidly decaying financial time bombs. The system was inherently unsustainable. The Mefo bills were massive amounts of circulating debt that had to be paid or rolled over eventually. The Bilateral Barter Agreements were inefficient and increasingly agitated Germany's trading partners. The repressed inflation, manifesting as chronic shortages, threatened domestic social stability. Schacht, the pragmatic nationalist, realized the time had come to consolidate, slow the rearmament, service the Mefo debt, and gradually reintroduce some consumer prosperity to prevent the entire economy from seizing up. Hitler, however, had an entirely different goal. He had only ever viewed the economy as a means to an end, total war and Lebensraum, living space. For Hitler, the Mefo system was not a temporary fix. It was a mechanism to be exploited until the moment of conquest. The conflict came to a head in 1936 with Hitler's announcement of the Soviet-style 4-year plan. This plan, spearheaded by the prominent Nazi Hermann Göring, had two explicit militaristic goals. Yani 1. Make the military strong enough for total war, and 2. Make Germany entirely self-sufficient, Autarky, to prevent a naval blockade from crippling the war effort, as it had in WWI. The 4-year plan directly undermined Schacht's authority by prioritizing military and autarky goals above all financial prudence. Göring used the very tools Schacht had designed, quotas, price controls, and subsidized synthetic production, but pushed them to the extreme. Schacht vehemently protested to Hitler, arguing that the increased unchecked spending would overheat the economy, but his warnings were futile. Hitler's core belief was that conflict with the Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy, the US and the Soviet Union, was inescapable. Therefore, Germany needed to prepare to invade the resource-rich Soviet Union to secure the necessary land and materials. For this, more spending was needed, not less. Schacht resigned as economy minister in 1937, though he remained Reichsbank president temporarily. He understood the dark logic. The economic system he created had only two possible outcomes: a slow, humiliating consolidation back to normal economics, or rapid expansion through war. War was the only way to pay the debt. Only through swift conquest could Germany secure the external resources, oil from Romania, industry from France, land from the east, needed to service the massive hidden Mefo debt, eliminate the internal shortages caused by autarky, and fuel the war machine's endless appetite. The economic miracle that saved Germany from the Depression was the engine that pushed it into global conflict. Schacht, the dark wizard, found himself sidelined, horrified by the monster he had helped create. He was eventually removed as Reichsbank president in 1939, clearing the way for Göring to take full, unchecked control of the printing press and import-export controls. The impressive parade to celebrate Hitler's birthday in 1939 was largely a result of Schacht's economic tricks, but the wizard himself was already a political prisoner in waiting. Following the failed 1944 assassination plot against Hitler, Schacht was arrested, spending the rest of the war in concentration camps. He survived, was acquitted at Nuremberg, due to the complex non-ideological nature of his initial financial role, and went on to live until 1970. The ultimate lesson of this economic horror is not the magic of financial engineering, but the deadly consequences of authoritarian central planning and hidden state debt. Schacht proved that a state can eliminate unemployment and build an army incredibly fast by abolishing the market mechanism. But the cost is the complete loss of liberty, economic efficiency, and human life. The hidden debt of the Mefo bills did not disappear. It merely changed the method of payment from taxes and austerity to war and genocide. The greatest economic illusion ended in the most horrific reality.